Hi, David here from Guitaria Music Tuition, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to look at the pentatonic scales. What is a scale? Well, it's basically a collection of notes that sound good together, usually played in ascending or descending order. And the reason for learning the scales is so you know what notes work with each other on the guitar. So if you just play random notes on a guitar, it's probably not going to sound very good. So that's why you would learn the scales, so you know what notes go with each other, so you can make your own guitar solos or your own songs, or maybe you're playing a famous song and you want to add something to it, maybe a little lick or a little solo. Then if you know your scales, it will help you to do that. There are a few different types of scales. For example, you've got the major scales, you've got the minor scales, you've got harmonic minor scales, melodic minor scales, blues scales, and the pentatonic scales. So today we're just going to look at the pentatonic scales. You've got the minor pentatonic scales and you've got major pentatonic scales. It's actually the same 5 shapes, but just in a different order. So there are 5 notes in the pentatonic scales, hence the pent in pentatonic. When I was learning these scales many years ago, I thought, hang on a minute, there's more than 5 notes in this scale, because, for example, this is the first shape. I thought, well, there's 12 notes there. Well, you are playing 12 notes, but it's the same 5 that are repeated across the strings. For example, if this note here on the 3rd fret on the low E is a G, the second note in the scale was an A sharp, the 3rd was a C, the 4th was a D, and the 5th was an F. So there's your 5 notes, and then they're just repeated. So that one there is G again, the one after would be the A sharp, then we have the C, then we have the D again, and then we have the F again. Then on the finished string, we've got the first 2 again, so G, and then A sharp, and then we're out of strings. So even though you might be playing 12 notes across the strings, it is just made up of 5 notes. So there's 5 shapes in the pentatonic scale, and each shape starts on the next note along in the scale. So I'm going to play this first example from the 3rd fret on the low E string, so this note is G, and the first shape is known as the minor pentatonic scale. So I'm just going to play the scale and then I'll explain some tips around it. So 3rd fret on the low E with the first finger, I'll use the 4th finger on the 6th fret, I'm going to pick that, and I'm going to move the 1st finger to the 3rd fret on the A string, 3rd finger on the 5th fret also on the A string, 1st finger on the 3rd fret on the D string, 3rd finger on the 5th fret on the D string, 1st finger is going to go to the 3rd fret on the G string, 3rd finger also on the 5th fret on the G, 1st finger on the 3rd fret on the B string, 4th finger on the 6th fret on the B string, 1st finger on the 3rd fret on the high E, and then your 4th finger on the 6th fret on the high E. So I'll do that one more time. Okay, now I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to go 4th finger to 1st finger, so 6 to 3. On the B string it was the same, so 6 to 3. I'm going to go 5 to 3 with the 3rd to 1st finger, then 5 to 3 on the D string with the same fingers, 5 to 3 on the A string, also with the same fingers, and then 6 to 3 with the 4th to 1st finger. So if I just play that down and up. So that's the first shape, so that's the minor pentatonic scale, starting on G, so that would be G minor pentatonic. Now this shape is movable, so if I started that shape on, say, the 5th fret on the low E, that note is an A, so then that would make that the A minor pentatonic scale. If I start it on the 7th fret on the low E, that note's a B. So if I play the same pattern, same shape, that would be then B minor pentatonic. And so on. So whatever note you start it on will give you the first part of the name. So if you start on a D, D minor pentatonic. If you start it on an E, be an E minor pentatonic, and so on. Okay, so that's the first shape and the most commonly used shape. So now we're going to look at the second position of the minor pentatonic scale. So what I'm going to do is start it on the second note of the first shape. So I started the first shape from the 3rd fret. The second note I played was actually the 6th fret. So that's where I'm going to start this second shape or second position. So this shape is different to the first. It is the same 5 notes from the first shape, just in a different order. So now I'm starting on an A sharp rather than a G. So this second shape goes like this. So anytime you have to stretch 3 frets within any of these 5 shapes, you will use the 1st and 4th finger. Anytime you've got a distance of 2 frets, so for example here to here, it will either be the 1st and 3rd finger, or sometimes the 2nd to 4th finger. So you might decide to use the 2nd to 4th finger over, say, the 1st and 3rd finger if on the next string you need to go back a fret. So what I mean is that in this second shape, the first 4 notes go like that. So if I use my 1st finger on that first note and then my 3rd on the 2nd note, I would have to move my 1st finger back a fret to play the next note in the scale. It's not ideal for economy of movement, so I would start with my 2nd finger, use my 4th, and my 1st can be hovering over the next note ready to play it. Like that. So you just have to look ahead a little bit on the notes within the scale to see if you want to use the 2nd to 4th finger. So your 1st finger can get ready for maybe the fret behind on the next string, or it might be that you can just use your 1st and 3rd finger and then move it. Okay, so now we're going to go over the 3rd shape of the minor pentatonic scale. So we're going to start this on the 2nd note of the 2nd shape. So remember, the 1st shape started on the 3rd fret. Our 2nd note of that scale was actually the 6th fret. That's where the 2nd shape started. The 2nd note of the 2nd shape was actually on the 8th fret. So that's where we're going to start this 3rd shape. It's going to go fret 8 to 10, 8 to 10, 8 to 10, 7 to 10, 8 to 11, 8 to 10. Okay, so the 3rd shape I started it with the 2nd finger, and then I went to my 4th finger for the next note. Does that on the A string as well, and on the D string. Then I use my 1st finger on the 7th fret here, my 4th finger on the 10th fret. Then I moved my 1st finger up a fret to the 8th fret on the B string, 4th finger for the 11th fret, and then my 1st finger on the 8th fret on the high E. And I use my 3rd finger for the 10th fret on the high E. And then just do that in reverse. Okay, so the 4th shape, then the 4th position, going to start this on the 10th fret. So that's the 2nd note of the 3rd shape. So 1st shape started on the 3rd fret, 2nd note of that was the 6th fret. We started the 2nd shape on the 6th fret. 2nd note of that pattern was actually the 8th fret. third shape started on the 8th fret, and the second note of that one was the 10th fret. So that's where we're going to start this fourth shape. So I'm just going to play it. Okay, so I went 10th fret, 13th fret, 10th fret, 13th fret, 10th fret to the 12th fret, 10th fret to the 12th fret, 11th fret to the 13th fret, and then 10th fret to the 13th fret, and then just do that in reverse. So the fifth shape starts on the 13th fret, and I'll start with my second finger, and it goes like this. Okay, so just to summarise on the fingers, if you've got a distance of 3 frets, it's your first and fourth finger. If you're playing notes with a distance of just 2 frets, it's either the first and third finger or second and fourth finger, depending on what scale you're playing and what notes follow. If you're not sure, just watch back me playing each shape and try and copy the fingers I used in those examples. Okay, so once you've played the fifth shape, you can repeat from the first shape again. So that would start on the second note of the fifth shape. So in this example that I've been given, the second note of the fifth shape was the 15th fret. So that's where I would start the first shape again. Then I could play the second shape from the second note of that, and so on till you run out of room on the guitar. Okay, so if you start each shape on the second note of the previous scale, they will all interlock, a little bit like a jigsaw, and connect, and all of those notes will sound good together because they're actually the same 5 notes just spread out over the guitar. And what that means is when you come to use them practically to create a solo or a lick, you can go in between any of those shapes and all the notes should sound okay together. So just remember, you don't have to start that first shape from the 3rd fret. That was just an example. If you decide to start it on the 5th fret from an A, that would make it A minor pentatonic, but then all the other shapes would shift along with it. So the second shape would start on the second note of that one, the third shape would start on the second note of the second shape, and so on, so they all would gradually get higher. If you decide to start the first shape on one of the higher frets, so for example, let's say the 10th fret, you can then obviously play the second shape on the second note of that, and the third shape on the second note of the second, and so on. But you've also got all this space behind the first shape. Well, behind the first shape, you've just got the 5th shape, and then the 4th shape, and then the 3rd shape. So it doesn't mean if you start the first shape higher up that any kind of space behind it's redundant. You can just play the shapes in reverse. Okay, so we've just gone over the 5 pentatonic scales. The first shape is the minor pentatonic scale, but they all interlock to it. Now, you've also got something called major pentatonic scales, and it's actually the same 5 shapes I've just showed you. But the second shape we just learnt, position 2, that is the major pentatonic scale. So for example, if you start that second shape from a G, again, this is just an example, that would then be G major pentatonic. So just to summarise, if you play the second shape of the minor pentatonic scale that we learnt, and you start it on a G, that would be G major pentatonic. Then the third shape of the minor pentatonic is the second shape of the major pentatonic. Then the 4th shape of the minor pentatonic is the 3rd shape of the major pentatonic. And then the 5th shape of the minor pentatonic is the 4th shape of the major pentatonic. And then the first shape, so the minor pentatonic scale, becomes the 5th shape of the major pentatonic scale. So it's the same 5 shapes, but just the order is shuffled round. So for example, if you did start that second shape of the minor pentatonic scale, which is, as I say, the major pentatonic scale, if you started that on the 5th fret from an A, that would make it A major pentatonic. If you start it on a B and play that shape, it would be the B major pentatonic, and so on. So you've got 2 sets of scales from the same 5 shapes. You've got the 5 minor pentatonic scales. You've also got the 5 major pentatonic scales if you play them in a different order. So shape 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the minor pentatonic, and then if you play the same 5 shapes that I showed you earlier from shape 2, so shape 2, 3, 4, 5, shape 1, that gives you the major pentatonic scales if you go in that order. Which scale you would use will depend on what song you're playing. Sometimes you might need to use the major pentatonic scale, sometimes you might need to use the minor pentatonic scale depending on the key of the song. We're not going to get too much in depth into that in this video. I'll make another video on that. But before you worry about that, just start by learning these 5 shapes. Use the fingers that I recommended. Also, when you're playing them, don't forget to alternate pick, so down, up, down, up, down, up, and so on, just to keep the scale nice and smooth, and this will help your technique in the future as well. So once you've learnt these shapes, you can start to play around with the order of the notes. You can start adding in techniques like ham-ons and pull-offs and slides to create licks and guitar solos. So just a little example, if I just play around with the notes within the first shape, the minor pentatonic scale. So you can see how that could start to become musical by just playing around with the notes in the scale. So scales is quite a big topic to discuss, too much information to put into one video, but hopefully it's give you some knowledge and information on what scales are, and I've just explained the 5 pentatonic scales. They're the most popular scales used in pop and rock, blues and metal. People tend to start with these pentatonic scales because they're just 2 notes per string. There's only 5 shapes, whereas with some of the other scales like the major scale and the minor scale, there's 7 shapes and there's more notes involved, so they're a bit more difficult to learn. So that's why people tend to learn the pentatonic scales first. Okay, so there's a lot of information there and it might have gone over your head, but hopefully you've understood some of that. Give them a go for now. Try and learn those 5 shapes I've showed you. So thanks for watching, and let me know how you get on, and I'll see you in the next video.